Hello, everyone. I'm Jim Garrison. I want to welcome you to this session of Humanity Rising. As we delve into a subject we've dealt with many times before, but because it's an inexhaustible ocean of exploration and wisdom, nurturance, well-being, intelligence, we're going to dive into that ocean again on the deep subject of original love, which is something we all bathe in every day and something we all seek, and yet paradoxically find ourselves extraordinarily deficient in our day-to-day interactions with fellow human beings, such that we're about ready to destroy ourselves. So this paradox between the omnipresence of love and the absence of love in we humans is probably the most profound topic of exploration. Before we dive into that extraordinarily layered and rich domain, I want to update us on what's going on two fronts. And first in Ukraine and then here in Washington, D.C., because I think it's very important that we keep up with unfolding events. Yesterday, we had Jeffrey Sachs talking to us about Ukraine and the emerging multipolar order. There's been a lot of commotion in the Western press about a ceasefire and whether the Russians would accept a ceasefire. And as Jeffrey Sachs, predicted, point of view, as you all know, with which I concur, there's not going to be any immediate ceasefire. And the Russians' senior officials in the Kremlin, including Vladimir Putin, in a press interview after his meeting with President Lukashenko of Belarus, and then Stephen Witkoff, the American emissary from Donald Trump, who had been on Tuesday in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia, for the meetings with the Ukrainians, and then flew to Moscow, met with Putin. And by all accounts, Putin said it's a very good idea to have a ceasefire. But before we get there, we need to have a discussion about what the ceasefire is all about. I won't go into the details again, but I just want to signal the central point that I think we were making yesterday about what's going on in Ukraine. And that is that these talks are the beginning of a process that may take months at the earliest to conclude, and will emanate not out of the diplomacy of what's going on, but on the military situation on the ground. That's how wars end, with a diplomatic negotiation based on who has won and who has lost. I don't believe there are any exceptions in the history of warfare, and Ukraine will not be an exception. And so it's very important for us to understand and follow now what's happening on the ground in Ukraine, the most important aspect of which is the complete collapse and rout of the Ukrainian forces in Kursk, which took place last year, last summer, and over the fall, where the Ukrainians tried to gain access to a Russian nuclear facility, failed in that, but decided to stay in Russia. And the Russians have inexorably pushed them back. And now the small town of Suzhia has been recaptured by the Russians, and the Ukrainians are in disarray and in retreat. And in the Donbass, it's estimated that the Russians are gaining a few kilometers every day. And before long, they will probably be along the eastern banks of the Dnieper River. And it's out of this situation that whatever ceasefire, whatever peace agreement will ensue. And so we all need to take on that Donald Trump is not in charge here. Vladimir Putin is. And that's just what's true. Just like at the end of the Vietnam War, the Viet Cong had defeated the Americans decisively. It took many years. But Richard Nixon and Henry Kissinger were not in charge of those negotiations. Even though Nixon was president of the United States and Henry Kissinger was Secretary of State. It was that small agrarian country in East Asia, Vietnam, that called the shots in Paris. That's how wars end. The second update, which I think is crucial for us to take in domestically in the United States, is the collapse of the Democratic opposition to the continuing resolution to keep the U.S. government solvent and funded through September, which was comprised of, can only say, vicious cuts in human and social welfare. And the Democrats were not able to defeat the continuing resolution in the House, just along a straight party vote. But they had the power to do so in the Senate because of the filibuster, because the Republicans could not muster the 60 votes. So right at this moment, when somebody could have stopped Trump, Chuck Schumer, Nancy Pelosi, and the Democratic leadership collapsed. And the continuing resolution is going to move forward. As Donald Trump, impotent externally, particularly in Ukraine, is emerging as undisputed power broker in the United States. This contradiction the simultaneity of a completely new geostrategic world order in the face of the decline of the U.S. imperium and the consolidation of authoritarian control inside the United States is the fulcrum around which world politics and the future of American democracy will take shape. So I just wanted to give us this little bit of an update. I know people will have different points of view. That's always welcome here on Humanity Rising. But I want to welcome you all to the session today. I'd like to now introduce our presenter for today, someone who's engaged very deeply in politics and how to think, and now with a book on love. He won 2 Nautilus Awards for his books, Original Politics. So I'm hopeful that he can comment on what I just said about what's going on. Original Thinking, and now a forthcoming book, Original Love. Glenn Parry. And he's an adjunct professor at the California Institute of Integral Studies, one of the leading academic institutions in the world, in my view, small, but dedicated to the emerging worldviews that all of us, one way or another, need to understand because we're being shaped by them. And so, Glenn, I want to welcome you to Humanity Rising. You should take off that you turn off your mute. There we go. And let's just begin, Glenn, with any comment you would like to make on my opening remarks, and then we'll move forward from there.
Thank you, Jim. It's a pleasure to be here, connecting with you from Placitas, New Mexico, north of Albuquerque, where my wife and I and our dog and cat and whoever else crawls in lives in this beautiful neck of the woods with wild horses and coyotes and even mountain lion and bobcat, bear, fox. I like being here. My response to your profound opening would be, first of all, to give you a lot of credit for being so on top of things and laying it out so succinctly, and proposing this fulcrum that is going to occur. I tell a story in Original Politics, which I'd like to share here because it's an adaptation of a White Mountain Apache story, because I think it's appropriate to what we're going through. And that's about an old woman who's weaving a beautiful rug. And as she nears completion of the rug, she gets up to stir a soup that's on the fire. But when she gets up to stir the soup, her black dog, who's been sleeping in the corner, awakens. And the dog comes up and starts to pull on a thread on the rug, and pulls and pulls and pulls until he unravels the entire rug. The woman returns. She doesn't get angry at the dog. She's unfazed. She looks into the rug where there was beauty and harmony. There's now chaos and distortion. But she keeps on looking. She keeps on staring into the rug until she's able to reimagine an even more beautiful way to reweave the rug in beauty and harmony. And that's a metaphor, a story for where I think we are today. So, as you pointed out in your introduction, things are very fluid. It's a great unraveling. We don't know what the world is going to look like. It's already shifting. I mean, we already have alliances that are being abandoned, and it's a very dangerous situation, but it's also an opportunity for us to particularly in America, to see the nation as it really is, and perhaps to make some substantive change. I mean, I also say in Original Politics that Donald Trump, and I was writing this that came out in 2020, but it's still true, I think, that Donald Trump is a catalyst for the revealing of the American shadow, the American psychological shadow. This nation has always had issues with racism, sexism, lack of awareness of genocide we've committed, not just on Native America, but in Japan. I'm married to a Japanese woman. Most Americans are pretty comfortable with the fact that we are the only nation that dropped two atomic bombs, mostly on civilian populations. We don't look
Yeah.
at that very much. We just don't look at it, at all. So that's an unawareness of the American shadow. So the advantage of a black dog such as Mr. Trump is that he's unraveling things the way that they were before, in such a way that gives us an opportunity to see things, to see how it really is, and to be able to then make changes. The disadvantage, of course, is that it's completely chaotic and it is very uh, unsettling for everyone. I'm just reading a brilliant book by Wendell Berry called The Unsettling of America,
Mm.
which is not about this particular subject, but it is it made me it came to my mind right now because things are very unsettled, and sometimes that can be okay if we uh, take this opportunity to reverse things. That's all. Yeah. Thank you for the beginning.
Well, thank you for those comments, Glenn. Why don't we back up to the beginning now? We'll circle back to these points later on, but share with us your story. You know, you come from European descent. You've ended up in New Mexico. You're deeply acquainted with the Native American tradition in North America. Um, Tell us your background, your story, and how you came to conceive of original politics, original thinking, and original love. I love those titles.
Thank you. Well, uh, you say I came from European descent, but I come from, I usually say that my descent is Basque, Aragon Spanish, and Jewish. Now, I should say I'm Jewish according to the Jewish tradition because my mother is Jewish. However, I relate more to my father's side largely because my Basque grandmother lived with us from age 3 to when I was about 13 or 14. Then she went to a nursing home for a couple of years where I was able to visit her there. But my Basque grandmother, what a blessing that was. See, I never took, still in my life, I have never once taken Pepto-Bismol or some kind of substance like that for a tummy ache. My grandma would do a laying on of the hands. She was very familiar with all the old ways. I mean, she walked 300 miles from a little village in the High Pyrenees to Barcelona, and she got a job there with a chef as a chef's attendant or sous chef, you might say. And then when the chef went to America, that's where she went. And somewhere along the way, she married an Aragon Spanish man. My father was actually born in Mexico City. But he moved back to New York City from age 1. He lived on 139th Street in New York City. Not really Spanish Harlem, it was Harlem. And he was an amazing self-made man, an engineer who worked on the Empire State Building and then later Apollo 11. He worked with Werner von Braun, and he was a brilliant guy. And my mom was a psychological or psychiatric social worker who was originally a writer. So she was a writer as when we were kids. And then she went back to work later and got her master's and PhD, so she was an intellectual pulse for me. So I describe myself as, it's really about what the nexus of your worldview is. I mean, I was blessed to grow up on a so-called dead-end street in Glen Cove, Long Island, that actually our neighborhood bordered on the Pratt estate. So I was able to walk through the woods for miles, which seemed even longer to me when I was very small. So,
Sure.
it took like 2, 3 miles to get to the Long Island Sound. That seemed like a real immense journey. And in a way it was. In a way it was. So I got to know through my grandma and through my own just playing in the woods. That was a good upbringing. And you know, I give my credit to my mom for introducing me to all kinds of intellectual things. I remember as a kid filling out some pie chart that made sure that you were doing all your reading in a total variety of subjects. And my dad taught me a class when you got to realize my father married my mother in 1950. He had to pretend to be Jewish. So he learned about Judaism. And then he went on to learn about all the world religions. So when I was 11 or 12 years old, and I was going to the Unitarian Fellowship, which was a compromise, and my father taught me a class on world religion, which just wasn't about just Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, but was about Buddhism, Hinduism, Zoroastrianism, Jainism, which was my favorite. Not killing, and I'm still act that way. I'll catch a cockroach if I don't, there aren't any anymore in where I am, but I would take them outside. I don't like to kill anything, so that was very beautiful upbringing. And then I should skip ahead to say that going to the aforementioned California Institute of Integral Studies was a real awakening. My professors there were amazing. Dr. Reddy, Angeles Arian, who became a friend, and she's also Basque, so that we could
Yeah.
bask in our heritage together. And then Dan Moonhawk Alford, who I really give a lot of credit for. He was my mentor into Native America. And Moonhawk described himself as standing at the lonely intersection of language, quantum physics, consciousness, and Native America. And that's what the class was about. It was a class called Anthropological Linguistics. And Moonhawk was the one who was invited by his mentor, Sagesh Youngblood Henderson, who was head of the Native Laws Center in Saskatoon, to go to the 1992 dialogue that brought together David Bohm and David P., Leroy Little Bear, and Moonhawk, other linguists. There was a linguist named Buff Parry, which has no relation to me because my father's name isn't Parry really. That's what he changed it to. So it's that became a pivotal move. I had already started the Seed Institute. That's what Seed did for then 13 years. And then that, together with doing ceremony with Native Americans, out of
Oh,
that's what changed my life and brought us to this moment we're talking about now.
and it was out of all that your trilogy, in effect, original politics, thinking, and love, really emerged. So this
Well,
is really a distillation of your life's reflections and inquiry.
okay, the first one that emerged directly out of the dialogue circle was called original thinking. And that was because Leroy Little Bear, the first question he asked at our dialogue circle in 1999 was, is it possible to come up with an original thought? And when he asked that question, this interesting thing happened, Jim, which is that all the Western people in the room, with a couple of exceptions, Lee Nickel, who was David Bohm's editor, was an exception, and M.J. Zimmerman, who later came to work for Seed, they looked at it a little differently, but almost all the Western people in the room tried to think of something brand new that had never been said before or done before. Because that's what the meaning of original has come to be. But the native people took the question as an invitation to connect to origin as a place. So what unites all my books, that seed question, is it possible to come up with original thought, is the seed of all the books. And in all the books, I'm using the word original as both place and time, and more as a source, particularly with the book Love, more as a source than even a place. Almost, it's kind of like a little bit. It is
Mhm.
a place, and I believe our thoughts come from places. I mean, have you ever had a? I say this to my students just to amuse you and who's listening. Have you ever? It's not a function of age. I bet everybody listening has had a thought that they're going to get something from another room. But when you go to the other room, you forget what it is you're going to get, right? What happens though when you go back to the room you were in, you remember again, right? Because you didn't bring the thought along with you.
Yeah,
so,
you
so you,
forgot to put it in your pocket.
you have to put it in your body, you have to take it with you, and then you can bring it. So thought does originate in places. So the book Original Thinking is really a book of eco psychology. It's a book of connecting our psyche to the land. The book
Yeah.
of Politics
Well,
was okay. Go ahead.
let's
Sorry.
pause at thinking because I think this is a very rich vein.
Okay.
That this notion that thoughts are associated with place, and I'm thinking of the growing body of evidence that indicates that thinking, even feeling, but certain creativities don't emanate from us, but come into us from the outside. And we simply capture them as they go through, but they're coming from the sun or they're coming from another place. How do you understand, the process of thinking? I'm sure you're familiar, the old Greek Roman notion of genius was not that somebody was smart,
Hmm.
but that someone experienced a visitation of the gods. It was a inspiration. It's something that comes into us that ultimately is not of our own origin. How do you understand it in relationship to original thinking?
Well, you've already described it. I understand it in the same way.
Huh.
So there is. I would look at the a good metaphor perhaps is like a television set. A television set doesn't create its own thoughts or its own programming. That comes from someplace else. But the television set needs to be tuned correctly, in order for it to be able to process those thoughts. So it's a mistake, in my view, to try to look inside the brain, especially, or even inside the heart or gut, because for the Chinese, you're thinking more from your heart. When my acupuncturist says you're doing too much thinking, she's concerned about heart,
Yeah, yeah.
not the head, not the brain. So it's a mistake to try to locate the source of thought there. But those organs, the brain, the heart, and the gut, need to be in correct vibration in order to be able to become, as you said, the receiver of genius. So genius needs to be a verb.
Mm,
So,
mm,
when you're geniusing, you are connected to source, and you're in tune. So I'm in complete agreement with you on that.
yeah. One just think drawing from the Jewish tradition, one thinks of the notion of even of the anointed ones, and the judges of the ancient Israel. The Lord God would visit upon a man and raise him up. And oftentimes, like in the story of Gideon, the individuals, like in the story of Moses, would resist. And so that there's also this interaction between the individual and the cosmic forces that require real alignment in order for it to be successful. One thinks of Mary, let it be done unto me according to thy will. Or Jesus, not my will, but thine be done. That there's a certain um, alignment, harmonization between the ego and the self, to use Jungian depth psychology, that allows the genius to indwell. Does that make sense to you?
It does. It does. There is definitely uh, the best aspect of religions of the world, I would say, is it allows people to understand that there's some source that's greater than themselves. And people start to tune into that. And that's a beautiful thing because it really isn't about yourself. Um,
Right.
that's the tricky thing about titling things original in the modern time. When I say original thinking, original politics, original love, I don't mean really that there's nothing else like it exactly. That's not what I'm talking about. It's original only in that it's coming through. It's coming through, and it's
Exactly.
really not there.
From
There
somewhere else.
yeah, you do writing, so writing is often miscast as this very solitary affair. Well, it may be solitary in terms of not having a lot of humans around you to talk with, but it's not solitary at all. I mean, if I, always feel the elements. I basically pray to the ancestors before I start something, and they give us the project. But I'll tell you later. I mean, I don't want, I know you've got a beautiful flow here, but when we talk about original love, that didn't even come from me at all, the idea to do the book. Now, you tell me when you're ready to hear that story. I'll tell you the origin story of original love.
Okay. Okay.
Every book I've written has an origin story. So
Well, you might as well tell it now. It's come up. I'd be happy
uh,
to hear that story.
okay. Well, the it was about 6 or 7 years ago, while I was writing Original Politics, that one fine morning, my beloved wife, Tomoko, who I've been married with for 36 years, at the time, I think about 30, she just pronounced one morning, "You're going to write a book called Original Love." And the thing is, Tomoko never says that. She never predicts my future. She had never done that before. She's never done it since. But that morning she said, "You're going to write a book called Original Love." And I am convinced that the reason why she she said that was that it was spirit speaking through her to make sure that I would listen. And so I did. And I took out my notebook and I started a computer folder called Original Love. But then I went back to writing the book Original Politics. And then a little over 2 years later, I was in Taos, New Mexico, and I was meeting with a woman named Jean Ellis Sankari, who was asking me to teach at UNM Taos, where she taught at the time. And but the strangest thing happened. She interrupted herself in the middle of a sentence and she said, "I just got a download. You're going to write a book called Original Love, and it's going to be the third in a three-part series with original in the title." Now, here's the funny thing about the story, Jim. At that time, I had changed the title of Original Politics to Sacred Politics. And
Ah,
that was the title that I got a book deal with Select Books for, who's also going to publish Original Love. And uh, and but after Jean Ellis Sankari said this to me, I went to sleep that night and I had my own. I don't know if it was a dream, but I woke up with my own download for how to write the book, which would be a book more about remembering love for Mother Earth. It would be a book more about when we were completely one with the earth and then we separated and now we need to remember and go back. and not so much a book about romantic love, which was a great relief to me because when my wife first suggested the title Original Love, I found it a little daunting. I mean, people have been writing for centuries and centuries about, romantic love, and they haven't really gotten anywhere, I think. So it's like, so
Tough subject.
it's a tough subject, right? Right. I, so I went back to Select Books to make a long story short and said, I mean, we've got to change this back. And fortunately, they were fine with that. And when I changed original politics, which had become sacred politics, back to original politics, it actually flowed better. And I
Yeah.
was able to connect it to the first book. So that's the only time that I knew it was going to be a trilogy. I didn't know until then.
Yeah. Well,
The
it's
ancestors.
reminding me, Glenn, of an experience I had with my first book. I had never thought of writing a book. I was, busy writing my PhD dissertation, and one day I did my practice and I sat down to meditate, and I been meditating for a few minutes, and then all of a sudden there was this cascade down into my head of a table of contents
Wow.
for a book and little précis for every chapter. And I was so startled
Hmm.
that I realized I was being gifted something, and I jumped up and I knew I needed to write it down before I lost it. And then I went into a kind of a frenzy, I would say. And over the next 2 months, on a little Smith Corona typewriter, I, I literally not, I don't want to use the word channeled, I wrote, but it was coming through me in a very, very powerful way. It eventually was called the plutonium culture.
Wow.
And looking at the relationship between nuclear weapons and nuclear technology. But it was an extraordinary experience to feel something coming from the outside in, that your job was just simply to receive, and then having received, to shape, to give it out into the world. And I think that's also part of this phenomenon is there's a receptivity, and then there's a giving forth.
Mm.
And that's what makes it ultimately real, because you receive it from the invisible realm. And then you have to work it in your psyche and soul. And like you create a little file on your computer and you're typing away, and things start to happen. And then next thing you know, you've got this book that you're sending off to the publishers. So it's an extraordinary phenomenon when that happens.
It sure is. It sure is. Sometimes I think the computer folders know something we don't know because I never changed the computer folder from original politics to sacred politics. I never changed it, because it was easier to
Totally.
just keep it the same, but then it came back. So maybe the computer knew. I don't know.
Well,
No, you're when you're speaking, it's reminiscent of what David Bohm said, and David Bohm, I think he got it from the Hopi partly. It's like because he did read Benjamin Lee Whorf, and so the idea of the implicate order and the explicate order. And the Hopi talk about the manifest and the manifesting.
Mm,
And the
mm.
ancient Greeks, and a lot of cultures today, too, often indigenous cultures, but we don't realize it. In the ancient times, pretty much everybody thought of the future as behind them. And the past was in front of them where they had eyes to see. That's the way the ancient Greeks thought about it. This is what Moonhawk taught me, and that's why they went to oracles to try to find the future, because they thought it was hubris for them to try to determine, predict, or control the future. But when I write a lot about, strangely, people may think why is he writing about this? But I write a lot about the advent of linear perspective in art, because it's in the Renaissance, it's just over 600 years ago, that we either reinvented or invented linear perspective in art. And then that was only then that we began to imagine the future as in front of us, and then we tried to predict and control it. And that becomes the precursor of the modern scientific mind. And it's really baked into the language. We talk about things in the near future. If you look linear perspective, somebody close to you is the near future. Somebody far from you is the distant future. So it really is about the future being ahead of you now. But nothing would have changed except that this cat named Alberti came along, and he wrote a book on how to do linear perspective, and that book got translated into 5 European languages, and we started to think of that way of viewing the world as real. That's realism, right? In art, but also in life. That's the way people think. That's it. We're supposed to be distant. We're not supposed to be involved with the world. Oh, that really hurts me in the heart. So it's what? What? We don't have one stationary eye. We have 2 liquid moving eyes
Yeah,
where
yeah,
we are involved in the world. We're
yeah,
supposed to be involved in the world. And I'm convinced that we recover this every night we go to sleep. We have the dreams, and the dream world is very much involved. I mean, it's
mm,
only I believe that it's only after we wake up that we try to put things back the way we are comfortable with. Like
yeah,
I had
exactly.
the dream, and I don't experience it that way in the dream. I experience this consciousness everywhere, which I think is probably closer to truth.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
And consciousness being in Jim's head and my head. No, it's everywhere. We're
Yeah,
just we're just able to tap
we're
in.
receivers. We're receivers.
Yeah,
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 yeah.
exactly. Well, let's in that spirit, let's jump into original politics, because we've got some pretty
Okay.
consternated politics going on, not only in the United States, but in Europe, in the Middle East, in Asia, and in Africa. Speak to us about original politics.
Well, uh, I would say that the way I like to define original politics is politics that includes the natural world. So, the mistake, in my view, that Western culture uh, embarked upon was when they redefined the greater good to be the greater good of humans only. So,
Exactly.
so most people, when they think of politics today, they only think of what human beings do.
Yeah.
But we don't do anything separate from nature. Forget about the fact that the sun 93 million miles away gives us light, life, and energy for us to exist at all. We're breathing in the air and breathing out the carbon dioxide that the trees and the phytoplankton are breathing in. That's a conspiracy. When I talk about a political conspiracy, that's a real conspiracy, because conspiracy means to breathe together.
Yeah.
So, so we, we're totally interconnected. So for me, politics needs to move back that way. And I think it is, believe it or not. If I take the most positive view, young people and some young politicians even are realizing more and more how much we're interconnected with the world. But I will give you my own pet peeve is that I write about this in Original Politics. I don't think we should be talking about how humans cause climate change. Because see, humans are the climate. We're the light, we're the air, we're the water, we're the earth. We are the climate. So of course we cause things, but we also, everything does. Everything is completely interconnected, radically interconnected. And so the direction we need to move to the most is to actually be speaking with the elements and developing a reciprocity with the elements,
Mm.
praying. That's what I think of as prayer.
Hmm.
You know, the book Original Thinking came about because I looked up the definition of thinking and I found out it was thanking. In English, French, Dutch, Norse, Frisian, German, and Old Anglo-Saxon, the origin of the word thinking is thanking.
Oh,
And
I
I
didn't know that.
and I
Thank you.
wondered, why would that be? Yeah, it's fascinating, isn't it? And that's
Fascinating.
just 7 languages I found out, but there's probably a whole lot more. So I realized that it's the shift in the way we think. And philosophers like Gene Gaither have been very helpful to me, you know, because we used to think in a way that was archaic, we were radically interconnected to all. We didn't even distinguish, we didn't know there was a mother. That's how the book Original Love starts. We're just one with everything. It's like being in the womb of Mother Earth.
Mm.
You know, what Gaither would say is there's magical consciousness, which is like equivalent of an infant child that's been born and has some separate identity, but is still really tied to the mother. And then, you know, a human life cycle kind of mimics what's been going on in the macro world too, because then we start to test the limits of our own powers and we try to exercise our mental capacities to the maximum. And we've been doing that. So we're in this mental rational realm. But what Gaither would talk about is that every structure of consciousness comes to a point where it becomes deficient. That's the translation of the German anyway. But and it's I just call it a devolution. It's something a way to you have to devolve. It's like a principle of inertia.
Mm.
Not inertia. That's the wrong word. Entropy. So things have to deconstruct, they have to fall apart before something new emergent can be born, which connects us again back with where we are in the political realm. The world order is falling apart, and there's a lot of grief to watch it happen. It's hard to watch the United States chummy up to Russia and insult our neighbor to the north, Canada. It's a lot of grief, a lot of grief. I have a lot of Canadian friends, and I can't believe it. What's going on right now? Um, However, you know, in the biggest picture, it's a grand unraveling, and maybe something even more beautiful will emerge out of that. And hopefully something more from the heart, more from the heart. Because right now, here's another way to look at politics too. Politics, if you want to kind of merge politics and love, which is what I did at the end of the book, Original Politics, that leads into Original Love, the politics that's the most loving has to be the most inclusive, has to be the one that not only accepts our interconnection, but
Exactly.
rejoices in it. So works together with everyone in our own nation, works together with the whole world. What's going on now is the opposite of that. So the current president is trying to recreate a world from, you know, where the United States operated alone and aggressively put tariffs on other nations to ensure our national security, supposedly. You know, I wrote about in Original Politics, Abraham Lincoln found out that tariffs didn't work. You know, it's the 19th century. He was trying to pay for the Civil War. And tariffs have been used since the inception of the nation with Alexander Hamilton and whatnot. So, so Lincoln put 37% tariffs on, but it didn't bring the necessary income because even then, the world was more interconnected than Lincoln realized. Now it's 100,000 times more interconnected. And tariffs will never work because everything is in everything. I don't need to tell you, you know what I'm talking about. Yeah.
Trump thinks he's channeling William McKinley in the
Yes,
1890s.
I know, I know, I know, and it's causing a lot of anxiety because it's, it's during the 1890s, there was actually very open immigration, right? So it was like not quite the same thing at all, and then in the yeah. So, I mean, we've gone through phases in the U.S. We've had the Chinese Exclusion Act or something. I guess that was like the 19th century. So every once in a while we try to shut down the border, and then we reopen it, and then we shut it down, and it's it always goes in cycles.
Well, let's turn into original love. Having your perspectives now on original thinking and original politics, which are very insightful. How does that roll into your third book? How do you
It,
conceive? How would you define love?
uh, well, thank you for asking that. Let me tell a story as a way of answering that question to go into it. It's it's a story that Dan Moonhawk Alfred liked to tell me, and it was when he was a young boy. He was about 10 or 11 years old, and his father took him to his place of work that day, and his father was a longshoresman who was working on the coast of California, and they're working amongst the tall trees. And Moonhawk spent the morning on a jitney, and they were stacking up logs and stuff like that. And that was great fun for a boy. But then they took their lunch break, and they took their lunch break dangling their legs over the Pacific Ocean. And this was the first time that Moonhawk had ever seen the ocean. So he says to his father, "Dad, that sure is a lot of water out there." And his father says, "Yep, and that's just the top of it." Okay, so Moonhawk told that story to illustrate the the depth of Native American wisdom that he had had some awareness of, but to
Yeah,
to say it's so much deeper than I could possibly imagine. And I
great
feel the
story.
same thing about Native American wisdom, but I would also say that I feel the same way about love. So I don't try to define love exactly in original love, although I do say it's very mysterious. I do say it's love from the origin, from the source, and it's timeless, like the ocean. And it's timeless like the ocean. It's being fed by the rivers and tributaries we call the past, present, and future. They're feeding into this timeless source. Love's always been here. Love will always be here. Love is so beautiful and so inspiring. I feel most in love when I feel connected with everything. So it's like a mystical experience, and but these mystical experiences are not ones that we want to um, cling on to or try to define. I mean, the best definitions of love are the ones like the ancient Greeks and Eric Fromm and other people that try to look at the aspects of love. So those are good. There's definitely different ways of looking at love, but ultimately it's beyond knowing. It's ineffable and unknowable, but it is the the vibration, the force that connects us with all there is. Now, do you know the ancient stories of Empedocles, the origin of the cosmos?
Tell us.
Okay, now that's a really good one. I like that one a lot, So Empedocles, and he's talking about how in
Just to
the
pause, Empedocles was one of the pre-Socratics, everyone,
That's
around
right.
6th
Yeah, he
century
goes back.
BC.
Yes, exactly. Thank you. So whatever it is, 2500 BC, I'm not sure exactly when it origin, but the story he tells, I think, is even far more ancient than that. He talks about an origin story where in the origin of the cosmos, there were the four roots. Now he named them after gods and goddesses: Zeus, Hera, Nestes, and Adonius. But later on, people started to credit Empedocles as the originator of the four element theory: light, air, water, earth. And there's some similarities, but he didn't actually use the word elements. He used the word roots. but but anyway, but he says in the origin of the cosmos, there's these four roots and there's love. Love is what keeps the roots together. Love is what keeps the elements together. But Empedocles also said that in the formation of the cosmos, it wasn't quite complete until another player enters, and that player is strife. so it's the four roots are mediated by love and strife. So ever since strife came in the picture, love begets strife and strife begets love. So it's like yeah, it is. And love is an interconnector, a little like the microbial world is an interconnector. A little, that's our oldest ancestor, Luka, and I'm not talking about Luka Doncic, who plays for the Lakers. No, like the mushrooms under the earth, that connects us all together. Oh, yeah, love, that's what love does. Strife
Within,
pulls things apart. Strife pulls things apart. And sometimes we need that.
yeah, yeah.
Okay. And we need it in politics, even. God forbid. Yeah. Go ahead.
This
Sorry.
is why, given what you just said about Empedocles, why I've always loved Plato's Symposium
Oh,
and the notion of Diotima in teaching Socrates about love, that added ingredient that she brings, which I think is very profound, is that the purpose of love as what she calls a mediating intelligence that binds everything together
hmm.
is to lead everything harmoniously to beauty. And she makes the point that even love serves beauty, because that's the defining purpose of why love knits everything together, to take all the strife and all the incompletions and all the inadequacies and to make something beautiful.
Yeah. That's really, God, that's gorgeous. Yeah. That's why the stories about the rug being pulled apart and then
Yeah.
reimagined in beauty and harmony speak to
Yeah.
me. Um, I think that's really brilliant that love is that mediating intelligence that binds things together. Yeah. Yeah. Did you also, I guess then you're also familiar with then the separation of the sexes story, because that's told in the symposium.
Of course.
Yeah, and that's one of my favorite stories too. Can
Tell
we tell
us.
that one
Tell
too?
us.
Yeah, because the way I kind of give a different twist on it, but I just love how it's said that, and this is told by Aristophanes, I think, in the Symposium.
Yeah,
So he
Aristophanes, the
was a
great
real
comedian.
character, but he's supposed to be a fictional character in the Symposium. But he says that originally all humans were double sex beings in a single body, and then we had and we were double of everything. We had two legs, I'm sorry, four legs, four arms. We only had one head, but we had two faces. And we moved very fast. We could move by doing cartwheels, and the gods became wary of us. These humans had so much power. They were concerned that they wouldn't pay attention to them, so we needed to cut them down to size, literally, and that's what they determined they would do. They would cut them in half like a flatfish. But the story goes that when they were cut in half, and by the way, so most of those double sex beings were male female, but some were male male and some were female female, which explains same sex attraction also. And some were androgynous completely too, which may explain something of what's going on today. So they, when they cut them in half with a flatfish, what happened according to the old story? The humans were devastated. They clung to each other, clung to their other half. They didn't eat, they didn't sleep, and they started to die. And that's when Zeus takes pity on these humans and decides to rearrange their genitalia so that they could hug each other and have sexual intercourse and perpetuate the species while hugging. Because supposedly before then, they were perpetuating the species by casting their seed on the ground like a cicada. Do you remember that part? So it's like, it's a wild story in a way. It doesn't matter whether it's a true story or not, because it's true on some level. People still speak like this. They still speak about, I want to introduce you to my other half. There's still something very compelling about the idea of opposites attracting and completing each other. So, yeah.
Well, yes, and Aristophanes also points out that in his view, this capacity of yearning integral to love, because we're not complete in and of ourselves. So there's something that animates love. It's this yearning for our completion. I've always liked that notion that love also has to do with a deep yearning of the soul.
Yeah, me too. Me too. I mean, I'm a huge fan of James Hillman. Are you a huge fan of James?
Yes, 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 yes.
Yeah, and we were blessed when I was running the Seed organization to have a conference called Art and Soul, and James Hillman came to New Mexico in 2004, and that was because I had met, and I'm like, right here, I'm gonna move my camera. Can you see that painting over there? That can you see that painting a little?
Raise up just a little bit. Raise up just a little bit.
It's
There we go. There we go.
yeah, okay.
Oh, wow.
That painting is by Howard McConaughey, who was the person who started the art therapy program at UNM, University of New Mexico. And Howard was a person that I was a big fan of James Hillman, and I wanted to bring him to New Mexico. So I networked and found the person who had already brought James Hillman to New Mexico once before, which was Howard McConaughey. And he studied with Braque in France. That painting is inspired by Braque. And boy, I wish you could have Howard on your show, but he's in the spirit world now, so you're going to have to do some serious.
I could have James Hillman on. He's in the spirit world
or
too.
or James Hillman, but anyway, that was a great conference, and people like Thomas More. Actually, I don't think Thomas More was at that conference, but we also brought him, Mary Watkins, Dave Abram, who I didn't initially invite, but I found out he was a big fan of James Hillman. And Dave was a part of everything that we were doing there because he's just an extraordinary person who I have great admiration for. So I hope you've had Dave Abram on your show.
Yes, we did twice actually in the early days.
Oh, good.
Mind.
Well, bring him back. He's an extraordinary person. So any rate, yes, soul yearning for wholeness, completion. My book subtitle, Original Love, is Uncovering the Timeless Source of Wholeness.
Mm.
So it's
There you go.
really about, I'm not defining love, but love is moving in the direction of wholeness. Love is what brings us toward greater wholeness. And that is a deep yearning. That's a soul yearning. I think the Taoists had it right when they're talking about the Tao that can be spoken of as not the true Tao, but the Tao divides into the two become the many things, and then the many things are coming back into wholeness, a oneness that is a oneness of unity in diversity. And that is the one with many aspects. This is the way all the ancient religions were. And I love that. I love that. And I think that for me completes something when I feel open and inclusive, then I feel loving, then I feel whole. Does that make sense?
Totally,
Yeah.
totally. And I think that, this brings us to the great insight of Aristotle in his Nicomachean Ethics, since you've been talking about Empedocles and the symposium and so forth, that this last point, that when you're feeling this, when you're living the virtuous life, he says that's when one becomes happy. That's the flourishing, abundant life, that it's not about external wealth. It's about an internal disposition of being
Hmm.
based on an embrace of the cosmic harmonies.
Hmm. Interesting. Now, I don't know that much about Aristotle, and I tend to be a little negative toward the poor guy
Ooh, oh no.
because and you're going, okay,
We got to
why
talk.
would you do that? Well, the reason is it seems like Aristotle wrote a book on politics. I mean, it seems like that's the beginning of the idea of the greater good being the greater good for humans only. So I like to go, I'm more comfortable swimming around in the ancient world with the pre-Socratics when and also I have to tell you, and to all the women listening, and you're going to all laugh, but I had a great epiphany writing Original Love, which is that much of what I've been studying for over 40 years, that I've been thinking of as indigenous wisdom, is also original feminine wisdom.
Hmm.
As original feminine wisdom. So I, I,
Say
I
more.
realized, I realized that, oh my God, so what, to go back to what I sent you as a write-up to frame this conversation perhaps, it's William Commanda, the Anishinaabe person who spoke about the seventh fire prophecy. And he's speaking about there will come a time when a people will emerge that will go back and pick up the wisdom that's been left by the side of the trail.
Hmm.
And I think that the two things that have been most left by the side of the trail are indigenous wisdom and the wisdom of the feminine. And the wisdom of the feminine is a lot about love and a lot about wholeness. So, those ancient goddesses, they were not the goddess. It wasn't just goddess of Mother Earth. They were goddess on all realms. Up into the heavens and into the underworld, and they naturally traveled to the underworld because the dark, the mysteries, that's the feminine experience. And women needed to tell this to me. So for me I'm not speaking from first person here, but maybe I am from another lifetime. I hope. But I think that that dark, that mysteries, though out of darkness everything is created, everything is born. We're all born in darkness and grow toward the light. We're not that different from a plant. We're not that different from a tree. We That's where creativity comes from. That is so profound, and that is where love originates from too. So it's not just indigenous wisdom, which is of wholeness. Original feminine wisdom is of wholeness. And I think that's why indigenous peoples honored the feminine so much longer than we did in Western cultures, where we went away from that. As James Hillman writes about, it's it's we still went to the underworld, with Hercules and everyone's going to the underworld, but it's a big battle. We're going to conquer something. And Jesus, according to Hillman, is a lot about conquering the underworld so his resurrection is about a victory over death. And but death is part of life, and it's part and the underworld and that beautiful dark experience is part of life. And I feel like I'm channeling Dave Abram a little bit here because I've had conversations with him, and he gets so unhappy when people get what gets so happy because the longest day or the longest night has ended and we're going to have more daylight. Because what do we need more daylight for? We need darkness too.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
It's to be
yeah, yeah.
celebrated.
And we have daylight savings time. We're always trying to
Yeah,
get more
yeah.
light.
That's a joke. Yeah, you cut off, you know the meme about that with the Indian who says you cut off the bottom of the blanket, sew it onto the top, and you call it a longer blanket. You don't know that one?
Yeah, I hadn't heard that one, but that's a good one. That's a good one.
Yeah, that's pretty much what it is.
Totally,
Yeah.
totally, totally, totally. Well, Glenn, this has been magnificent. I really thank you. I look forward to looking at your book when it comes out. Now, tell us, when does your book come out?
It should come out this October, God
Okay.
willing. And from Select Books, and I hope to publish a couple of sample chapters. If you were on my newsletter mailing list, I might have sent you a sample chapter just recently, which is about the mythical age of goddesses. And in Cosmos magazine, I'll be
Oh, Cosmos.
almost
Okay,
certainly
good.
publishing a couple of chapters. Uh, and maybe I'll approach Parabola or something. That's another magazine I have a high regard for.
Yeah, that's a great magazine.
Yeah, yeah. So, and there's also Emergence. There's a lot of wonderful magazines out there. So
Yeah,
perhaps I'll publish little snippets in
yeah, here and there.
along the way. But
Well,
yeah,
thank you
otherwise,
so much. That you are an original mind, and so thank you for your expositions today because I think the original impulse around thinking politics and love is essential for us to contemplate in our time because we need to get back to the origins
mm,
if
yeah.
we're going to save ourselves. We're not going to do it by tinkering with the system, tinkering with the blanket.
Yeah, yeah, and back to the origins. It's timeless. It is
Exactly.
original in the modern sense too.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Thank you, and thank you for all the work you do in the world, for Ubiquity University, for your Humanity Rising podcast, for all the beautiful beings that you regularly convene. You bring together, and the audience that has been evolved around you is helping to change the world in a really positive way. And I thank you for your work.
Well, thank you, Glenn. Glenn Perry, everyone. He's going to join the after chat. You'll see the link in the chat box that Stan just put in. You received the link in your Zoom reminders for today. And we'll see you again on Monday for another full week of wondrous people with incredible contributions that they're making to our world. Thank you, Glenn. Thank you, everyone. Bye for
Thank
now.
you, Jim. Many blessings.